pointer is that you get a little clue here. So these represent every rule, and we'll test it out. We'll try to predict what actual is going to be in each one. So here, this one's done. I'll walk through this one, and then you guys can walk through the next one, okay? So once this function is executed, we're creating an fn variable, and we're saving a function. We're skipping over the body of the function. However, we're invoking it here, so that means we jump into the body of the function. We are creating a variable called name, and we're assigning it to the string inner. We're assigning actual, which is a variable in our very parent scope, to name. So once this is done executing, we jump immediately to this next line. Actual equals inner, because actual is available to both this scope and this outer scope, because it's a parent of both. And so actual is equal to inner, and if we really want to get fancy with this, expect is being evaluated, it's being called, and it's going to go into the innards of our testing library, and it's going to return something that will be evaluated against this, whatever this value is. Because you can expect this to be false, or to be a function, stuff like that. Okay. Any questions about this exercise? Okay. So this rule is called a function has access to its own local variables. So when we say own local, that means it's in the same function block. Cool? All right. The next one is inputs to a function are treated as local scoped variables. Who wants to go first? Not all at once, guys. I know this is exciting stuff. Anyone? You can just raise your hand. Okay, Michael.
True.
No, you have to run the code.
I have to what?
Just like I did.
Oh, I have to talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the very first thing that's going to happen.
Oh, okay. Well, we create the function fn and pass it the argument name or the variable name.
Well, we're going to create a variable, and we're going to assign it to a function, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. What's the next thing that happens, Jamie?
And then we're going to call the function and pass it inner.
Mm-hmm. And then Abdi, what happens next?
We immediately run to expect.
Well, we call the function. What happens then? You go into the body of the function, right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. So we go inside the body of the function and we assign inner to actual.
And where does inner come from?
The argument parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, the argument got passed in, which then gets reassigned to actual.
Yep. And then Chris, what happens next?
And then it falls down to expect actual equals inner to be true.
Cool. Any questions about this? This is what we would expect, right?
I was thinking that.
Oh. Yeah, the question marks mean fill in the blank. Cool. Okay, Eddie, do you want to try the next one? So this rule is block scope can be created with let.
So line 31, function is created with the name fn.
Mm-hmm. And then Cameron?
And the variable where is created and assigned the string.
Well, actually, we don't enter into...
Oh, right. Call the function.
Yeah, we go down to the next line, and then we call the function, and then Ben?
Inside the function, we declare a variable where. We didn't set it to the value outer.
Okay. And then Dan?
We create a new scope and another variable named where called inner.
Mm-hmm. So we create a variable with the keyword let with inner, and we talked about this a little bit before, but let creates block scope, and a block is anything with 2 brackets. So I've been talking about function blocks, and that's really what most of JavaScript's scopes is about, is function scoping. But with the keyword let in ES6, we also have block scope as well. And people coming from other languages should be pretty familiar with block scope, or other languages with block scope. It's pretty common. Okay.
So actual is assigned the value where, which in this case would be outer.
Okay. And then what happens next?
It goes down to the line 39,
Mhm.
and the question marks become, I think it's outer, because the other one would be out of it, inner would be out of the scope.
Yep. Exactly. Cool. And if this was var, how would that change?
No longer be a block.
What's that?
It would no longer be a block.
Yeah.
So you would just rewrite the same variable.
So it would be actually be inner. Cool. Questions there?
Is it just let in the ES6 that creates its own block, or are there other verbs that do that as well?
I think it's just let.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because it's within a block, it's not, inner's not getting reset? Or inner's just specific to
It's
what's
just
inside the block?
specific to here, yeah. Exactly. So outside of this, it looks in its own scope if there's a value that matches that variable, and we have it here. If, for example, well, let's look at actual. So actual will first look in this scope, in this function scope, and say, is there an actual around here? And no, there isn't, right? There's no defined actual. And then we'll look up in the next scope. It's not there either. And then we'll look up in the next scope where it lives, and it will find that, and it will realize that it's undefined.
So does another where get created in memory then inside of that scope? And then when you exit the scope, does it disappear?
Yep. And also some funny things happen with scoping as well when Chrome optimizes your code. So if you're going through the debugger and you're trying to access variables in that would be accessible in that scope. Does that make sense? So it should be accessible, but in the Chrome debugger tools, they aren't, because there's an optimization step where if you're not actually referencing that value, it just gets garbage collected. It's not actually, it doesn't exist there. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. We'll look at that a little bit more in depth later. Okay, where did we leave off? Okay. So line 42 is a function has access to the variables contained within the same scope that function was created in. All right, so where did we leave off? Is it your turn, Josh?
So
Line
on
43.
on line 43, we declare a variable and set it to outer.
Yep. Altamir?
And we have the function declaration fn.
Mm-hmm. Create a function there, save it in a fn.
In the function, actual is assigned to name.
Well, first we have to call it.
Oh yeah, you gotta call it.
Yeah. So then we call the function. And I'm really picky about that, just so you know. And then we'll go back to Michael.
So wait, we just did the
We just
invoking
called the
function?
function.
Okay, so we go into the function itself.
Mhm.
We create a variable called.
Where are we creating?
Oh
it?
no, yeah,
We're just assigning it.
yeah. Sorry, we're assigning fn to a function.
We call the function, we go into the function body.
Hmm. And then we're setting actual to name.
Yeah. And what is name?
It doesn't see it in its normal scope, so it looks up to outer.
Nice. Okay. Great. You want to go next, Jamie?
Sure. We are defining first fn as a function.
Then we jump down to first function,
Mm-hmm.
which then jumps back into the function we created up top.
Mm-hmm. And then Chris?
Yeah.
And then we create a variable local to first function set to inner.
Okay. Eddie?
So then we're at line 56 in the expect
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd go inside of that expect, and the function is setting the local first function to actual.
But it's not being called.
It's not?
Do you see it being called?
Well, so I guess I thought expect was being called because there's the open parentheses
Mhm.
after it. Is that incorrect?
That's correct. Expect is being called.
Oh, but the function inside of expect is not being called. That's
Well,
what you're saying.
I'm just saying we should be mindful of whether or not it's being called.
Okay.
We don't visibly see it being called,
Okay.
right?
Right.
But we can assume that it's being called in the expect if this test works, right?
I think I get it.
So it's
You know
not
what I
being
mean?
called yet.
Well, my point is that this is a function, this is just an anonymous function
Mm-hmm.
that we're looking at, and Eddie was just acting like it's for sure being called, but technically we don't know that because we don't really know what expect is going to do.
Okay.
But it seems like the way it's set up, that is probably being called. I'm just being picky. Yeah.
Oh, because we don't know anything necessarily about the internals to expect?
Right. So there was just an assumption there, and I wanted to point out that there's an assumption that expect inside of that function is calling this anonymous function, but we can't visibly see that right now. That's all. That's all. It's like the definition versus invocation thing. Okay.
Oh, so then I could safely say that function inside of expect is being defined.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I'll give it to you that yes, it is actually being called into expect. But yes. Okay, Cameron. So we're saying here, we're expecting this to throw an error. Why? Could turn it into a question if you have one.
I'm not sure where we're at. Is to throw next, or was that covered?
Nope. To throw has not been covered yet.
Okay.
But my question really is, so we're saying this function is being executed, and this expect statement is saying is we're expecting it to throw an error. And why is that? It's not important for us to go into the internals of how it's running for this particular case, but we should know why it's throwing an error.
It's a local variable in that anonymous function being
Yeah.
set.
And it doesn't have access to this one. So it's referencing a variable in a different scope. And it's like really in a different scope. It's like way over here.
So would that just throw actual as undefined?
No, it's not
Okay.
actual. It's this one. Local to first is undefined.
Yeah, okay.
And then, Aisha, do you want to go next?
Sure. The next expect is
If you want me to scroll or anything, let me know.
yeah, I want you to scroll probably
Which
back
way?
up.
Tell me, like, when.
Probably right here, because I think oh, it's global? Okay, go back to the global variable. So, so it's null.
Did you guys catch that? So it's null because before each its statement, we reset the value to null. And in this case, we didn't set it to anything because we threw an error because we were trying to access a variable in a scope that we don't have access to.